somewhere beneath the North Atlantic, in absolute darkness, under 12,600 feet of water, cold enough to freeze the human body in minutes, lies the most studied shipwreck in history. And yet, for over a century, almost everything you think you know about it has been wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. The movies got it wrong. The books got it wrong. Even some of the scientists got it wrong. But now, for the first time, we have something extraordinary. A full 3D digital scan of the Titanic, every inch of it, built from 16 terabytes of deep-sea data, stitched together into the most complete picture ever assembled of a ship that the world refuses to forget. And what that scan reveals changes everything. Think about what it actually takes to document a wreck sitting nearly 2.5 miles below the surface. No light reaches down there, no diver can survive the pressure. The wreck spans an area roughly the size of a small town, debris scattered across the ocean floor, like the aftermath of something unthinkable. For decades, we had photographs. We had grainy submersible footage. We had fragments of a story told through rusting steel and broken glass. But in 2022, a team of deep-sea specialists deployed a fleet of underwater robots equipped with cameras so precise, so patient, that they circled the wreck for months, capturing every angle, every shadow, every detail. What came back was 16 terabytes of raw data. When scientists and engineers processed that data, when the image finally resolved, they weren't just looking at a shipwreck, they were looking at a crime scene. And for the first time, the evidence was all in one place. Here's the first thing the scan makes undeniable. The front of the Titanic, the bow, is in stunning condition, relatively speaking. The railings still stand. The anchor chains drape across the hull. The grand portholes are still there, dark and hollow, staring out like empty eyes. It almost looks preserved. The stern is something else entirely. Where the bow looks like a ship, the stern looks like a catastrophe. Crumpled, compressed, twisted beyond recognition. Sections of decking peeled outward, like the pages of a book thrown into a fire. Why the difference? It comes down to the way the ship broke apart and the forces that took hold in those final moments. When the Titanic split, and it did split, right at the surface before it ever reached the bottom, the bow went down first, slowly, nose first. It descended through the water column in a relatively controlled dive and struck the ocean floor with a kind of terrible grace. The stern had no such dignity. Once the ship tore in two, the stern section, suddenly free, suddenly flooded, began to spin, to tumble. It fell through nearly 2.5 miles of water in a chaotic spiral, what imploding under pressure, collapsing inward until it hit the bottom at a speed that turned steel into something closer to paper. That is why one half looks like a ghost ship, and the other looks like a demolition site. And the scan lets us see both, side by side, in complete, haunting detail. Now, the iceberg. Ask almost anyone how the Titanic sank, and they'll tell you the same thing. A massive gash. A long, jagged tear ripped down the side of the hull by the edge of the iceberg. It's in the movies. It's in the textbooks. It became the defining image of the disaster. This enormous wound opened across the ship's belly. It never happened. When divers and researchers were finally able to examine the hull directly, they found something far more unsettling than a dramatic gash. They found a series of small punctures, narrow slits, buckled seams, sections where the steel plates had bent inward, just enough to let water begin its slow, unstoppable invasion. The total area of damage? Roughly comparable to a few sheets of printer paper. That's it. That's what doomed the ship. Not a catastrophic wound, but a quiet failure. A collection of small openings across multiple compartments, spread far enough apart that the watertight bulkheads were defeated not by force, but by geometry. The ship was designed to survive flooding in any 4 compartments. The iceberg opened 5, by less than a meter in places. The new 3D scan confirms it with a clarity we've never had before. The damage is subtle, understated, which somehow makes it more terrifying, not less, because it means the Titanic wasn't sunk by something overwhelming. It was sunk by something almost small enough to miss. The new data also gives us something else, a chance to correct the historical record on people who were never given a fair account. First Officer William Murdoch. For decades, the narrative around Murdoch has been complicated by dramatized portrayals that painted him as someone who behaved dishonorably in the final hours. Those portrayals were not based in evidence, they were inventions. The kind of dramatic license that felt acceptable when the real facts were buried under thousands of feet of water and a century of distance. The evidence we now have, combined with survivor testimony, tells a different story. Murdoch worked the lifeboats. He kept order. He helped load passengers. By nearly every credible account, he performed his duty under conditions that were, by any measure, extraordinary. His family spent decades asking for an acknowledgement of the record. It took far too long. The 3D scan can't give us a full picture of human behavior in those final hours. But it can give us the physical facts, the timeline of the flooding, the sequence of structural failure, and those facts align far better with the accounts of competent, dedicated officers doing their jobs than with the fictional villainy cinema invented. History deserves accuracy, especially, when it's hard to unwind. Here is a story that almost no one knows. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, when the flooding began, when it became clear that the ship was not going to survive the night, there was a group of men deep in the hull who made a decision. They stayed. The ship's engineers, the men who ran the boilers, the turbines, the electrical systems, chose to remain at their posts, not because they were ordered to, not because they didn't understand what was happening, but because they understood exactly what was happening. And they knew that the moment they abandoned their stations, the power went out. And if the power went out, the pumps stopped. The lights went dark. The wireless, the only connection to rescue ships hours away, went silent. So they stayed. They kept the lights on for 2 hours and 40 minutes. They kept the wireless transmitting. They kept the pumps running against an ocean that was never going to be held back. Because of them, the lifeboats could be loaded and launched with light. Because of them, the distress signal reached the Carpathia. Because of them, hundreds of people survived who might not have. Not one of those engineers made it off the ship. The 3D scan can map the machinery rooms where they worked. It can show us the physical space where that decision was made. It cannot capture what it took to make it. But we can say their names and we can remember what they chose to do. Here is something the new scan made clear in a way that nothing before it could. The Titanic is vanishing, not slowly in the way that old things fade, but actively, visibly, in ways that shocked even the scientists who have been studying the wreck for decades. The culprit is a bacterium, a microorganism discovered on the wreck itself that feeds on iron. It consumes the steel of the hull, converting it into rust formations called rusticles, long, fragile orange stalactites that drape off the wreck in curtains and columns. Beautiful from a distance, devastating in what they represent. Every rusticle is metal that used to be the Titanic. The wreck is also under constant assault from the pressure differentials of the deep ocean, from sediment shifts, from the slow collapse of internal structures that no longer have anything supporting them. Researchers who compared footage from the 1980s to the imagery captured in 2022 were confronted with sections of the ship that simply weren't there anymore. Portions of the officers' quarters, entire stretches of the promenade deck, gone. Estimates vary, but the consensus is sobering. Within the next few decades, possibly sooner, large sections of the wreck will have collapsed entirely. The 3D scan exists, in part because the scientists who built it understood they were in a race, not against the ocean, against time. There's something about the Titanic that has always refused to let us go. Maybe it's the scale of it. Maybe it's the stories, the individuals, the decisions, the moments of courage and confusion that played out across a single impossible night. Or maybe it's this: the Titanic is a mirror. It shows us what happens when we believe something is unbreakable, when we mistake confidence for certainty, when the gap between how powerful we think we are and how powerful we actually are gets tested, suddenly, in the dark, in the cold, by something as old and indifferent as the sea. The 3D scan didn't just show us a shipwreck, it showed us the truth of it, finally, completely. And the truth, as it turns out, is far more extraordinary than anything the movies ever imagined.